Let's bring in Dr. Kevin Roberts, president of the Heritage Foundation. Good morning to you, sir. You know, there is a crisis at our southern border already. So what's it going to look like once Title 42 expires in May?
Well, Carly, it's going to be far worse than it's been, which is really saying something. You know, I have the privilege of leading one of the largest policy groups in the world, and so I mean this not to be hyperbole. All of the migrants who've come across illegally in the first year and a half of this administration will pale in comparison to what happens starting next month when Title 42 expires. So I applaud my good friend, Governor Abbott of Texas, for doing everything he can in his limited ability as a governor rather than someone who is leading the federal government in addressing this. This is the problem, Carly. When you visit the border, as I've done many times, and you talk to mayors and county officials, but most of all regular Americans, you realize that this surge is upending the American way of life. And this is not a Democrat or a Republican problem, or at least it shouldn't be. The Democrats turn it into a problem. It's really important that we understand as a people that this is changing our American way of life.
You and the folks there at the Heritage Foundation have a new center to combat the border crisis. When you see the images and you hear about the numbers, do you think that is a fight that you can win?
Yeah, it's a great question, Todd. You know, perhaps it sounds a little idealistic for us as we launched our Center for Border Security and Immigration to say we look forward not only to addressing this crisis this year, but getting to the ultimate aspirational goal, which a vast majority of Americans want, and that is an immigration system that's transparent, that's fair, that allows legal migrants to come here. Let's face it, all of us are in this country because our ancestors came here. It's a real travesty that we have a system that's chaotic, that it's run by bureaucrats, and frankly, and I lament that this is the case, it's run by a Biden-Harris regime that actually wants illegal immigration to happen to upend our American way of life. We have to get to a fair, transparent immigration system that honors the rule of law. We happen to think we're going to be able to get there as soon as 2025 once there's a governing conservative majority and a much friendlier administration.
Well, from the border to inflation, yesterday Bernie Sanders addressed the crisis, and I'm glad you're sitting down because this may come as a shock to you. He blamed corporations and corporate greed. Take a listen to this.
During this pandemic, during the war in Ukraine, during all of this instability, that this be a moment in which large corporations continue to enjoy huge profits. And I think the American people, based on the polling that I have seen, have had enough.
Yeah, and you hear President Biden echo this type of sentiment, too, that high gas prices are because of greedy oil companies, not his policies that are trying to shrink fossil fuel usage. Are Americans buying this?
No, they aren't, Carly. What Americans have had enough of is elites like Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden trying to talk about inflation as if it's started by anything other than failed policies by their administration. But let me say this. People, elites in D.C., tend to talk about inflation as if it's abstract. I can tell you, having grown up in a working class family in the 70s and 80s, and the last time we had inflation like this, promulgated by failed leftist policies, that we feel inflation in a very different way. It's not an abstract number. It's not saying, oh man, the cost of milk is a little bit higher. It's that we can't buy the milk. We can't turn on the air conditioner. We can't turn on the heater. This administration is changing the decisions that Americans make. Obviously, that's going to have political consequences, but I like to see policy through the lens of the eyes of real people, and real people right now are suffering, and people like Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden are just sort of nonchalant about what they're seeing.
Finally, Nikki Haley, former UN ambassador, calling out the UN on their Ukraine inaction. Listen.
How can you say you're an organization committed to peace and allow such a brutal dictator that's killing innocent civilians and allow that genocide to happen? If you're not going to acknowledge China, you're not going to call out Russia, what is the point of the UN?
Dr. Roberts, to her point, why has the UN been so more or less useless so far in the response to the Ukraine invasion?
Well, the UN's been useless for its entire history. And in fact, here in 2022, we have a sort of a contest. Who is more useless and feckless, the United Nations or the Biden administration? So God bless Nikki Haley for her moral clarity. But this is really where the rubber meets the road. Kind of going back to policy through the eyes of average Americans, we don't understand how Russia could be on the Human Rights Commission to begin with. This whole thing is absurd. And, you know, if this weren't a news show, we would sort of think that we're on a comedy routine. But it's really important for people to take hope from comments by people like Ambassador Haley that we are going to turn this country around. We have to weather another several months of the nonsense we're seeing. But the real good news, Todd, as I think you appreciate, is that Americans have had enough. We're saying so. We're going to turn the corner, and we're going to take our country back.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, Russia and China being permanent members of the UN Security Council does absolutely make them useless in this setting and so many others. Your organization, the Heritage Foundation, absolutely not useless.
Not useless.
Dr. Kevin Roberts, thank you so much for joining us this morning. We so appreciate it.